Hi, I'm Lennox, and I guess this story starts the day my future got priced out by a number I didn't choose. It wasn't loud, no screaming, no one caught in the act, just a plain white envelope sitting at the bottom of my mailbox. I didn't know it yet, but that envelope was going to rip through everything I thought I could trust. See, I've always been the solid one. Not flashy, not dramatic, just steady. The kind of man who pays things on time, shows up early, and thinks loyalty matters more than convenience. I never thought being that kind of man could be used against me. But that's what happens when the people closest to you decide you're responsible enough to betray. I held it in my hand for a second longer than usual. Something about it making the air feel heavier than the late summer dust deserved. No branding, no return address. Just my name, spelled neatly, like someone had taken the time to make sure it couldn't be ignored. I didn't rip it open right there. I didn't need to. You know how sometimes you just know? I walked back into my apartment, the one bedroom I'd been leasing for the past 2 years while I saved for a down payment. The light was still on in the kitchen, casting a soft yellow hue across the hardwood floors I kept spotless. Not for anyone else, just for me. I sat down, laid the envelope flat on the table, and opened it with the kind of care people usually save for birth announcements or letters from a dead relative. Inside was a denial from the bank, a denial for the mortgage application I'd spent months preparing. Pre-approval, paperwork, financials, all airtight, or so I thought. I blinked, read the letter again, and then again. Due to outstanding federal student loan defaults totaling $127,894.37, your credit score does not meet our lending threshold. I don't remember how long I stared at that number. I don't remember breathing, because I never took out a student loan. That night I didn't sleep. I didn't drink, didn't rage, didn't even call anyone. I just sat there, laptop open, refreshing my credit report, hoping it was some clerical error. A mix-up, a stolen identity, anything but what it actually was. Loan after loan, year after year, each one taken out under my name, all traceable back over a decade. Pell Grants, private lenders, consolidations, a timeline I didn't remember living, but someone did. The next morning I called my mother. Her voice was unusually cheerful, the kind of bright that you can tell is fake if you've lived through enough family dinners where silence could slice steak. "Morning, sweetheart. Everything okay?" I swallowed hard. "I got denied. For the condo, the loan." Something came up. Pause. "Oh? What did they say?" she asked like I just mentioned a weather delay. "They said I owe nearly $130,000 in student loans I never took." Silence. Longer than it should have been. Then she sighed. Soft, disappointed, like I'd brought up something embarrassing in front of guests. "Honey, we always meant to pay that back. We just never told you because we didn't want you to worry." I felt my hands clench without realizing it. "You did this?" "Well, it was for Damon. He needed school, and we couldn't qualify for more aid under our names." I stood up from my chair, pressing a palm to the edge of the table like the wood might ground me. "Mom, you used my name, without my consent, for years, and you didn't think I'd find out?" Her tone shifted. Less sugar, more salt. "You've always been the responsible one, Lennox. We knew you'd be okay." That's my name. Lennox Dre. Not common, not forgettable, and now, not clean. "You always land on your feet," she added, softer now. "Your brother, he needed a chance. The line between hurt and betrayal is thin, razor thin. And at that moment, my mother sliced straight through it. I didn't call my father. I didn't need to. When one parent crosses the line and the other says nothing, the silence speaks for them both. By the end of the week, I'd confirmed every detail with the Department of Education, pulled transcripts from schools I'd never attended, and found payment records that led to an address I hadn't lived in since I was 17. The timeline was clear. They had done this, piece by piece, quietly. While I worked double shifts in my 20s, skipped vacations, paid every credit card on time, and thought I was building a future. Turns out I was just covering someone else's past. "You've always been the responsible one." What a trap that is. They build you up as the strong one just to lay the weight on you. And when your knees buckle, they act like you betrayed them. That weekend, I drove to the cabin, the one Grandpa left behind before he passed, the one I thought would be mine someday because I was the only one who visited him in his final months, the only one who chopped wood with him, kept the water lines from freezing, picked up the mail. I found a new lock on the door and a freshly posted real estate flyer. I drove back from the cabin in silence. No music, no calls, just the rhythmic sound of tires against pavement and a mind busy trying to find the moment I should have known. When exactly do you realize your family doesn't see you as a person, but a backup plan? The sale listing on the cabin hit me harder than the student debt. At least with the debt, there were paper trails, numbers, some system to challenge. But this, that lock on the door, it was personal. It was my grandfather's last gift, something he whispered to me when he was sick. This place is for you, Lennox, because you're the only one who never asked for anything. Turns out, not asking is exactly what made me the easiest to take from. When I pulled into my apartment lot, I saw Damon's car already there, parked in my usual spot like he owned the damn thing. A sleek gray Lexus, bought new, no doubt still being paid off monthly. He was leaning against the hood like it was a photo shoot, sunglasses on even though it was past sunset. "Dude," he called, lifting a hand lazily, "we need to talk." I stepped out and slammed the door harder than I meant to. "Then start talking." He smirked, pushed off the car like it was a slow-motion scene. "Mom and Dad said you're throwing a fit over the loans. Thought I'd come clear the air." I stared at him. Damon has always had this calm arrogance. Like the world was a joke he already knew the punchline to. "I'm not throwing a fit," I said. "I'm correcting something criminal." He shrugged. "It's not like it ruined your life. You've got a great job, a good apartment, no kids. What's a little debt, man?" I felt something shift in me, something quiet and final. "You know what's worse than debt?" I asked. He waited. "Being used without even being asked. Having your own family decide your future like it's a chessboard and you're just the pawn they move around." Damon rolled his eyes. "You're being dramatic. They meant to pay it back. It just didn't happen." "You've known for how long?" He paused. That told me everything. "They told me after college," he finally admitted. "Said it was easier that way. You were always stable, I wasn't." I laughed once, bitter, dry. "So I get punished for being stable? Don't act like some martyr, Lennox," he snapped, voice sharpening for the first time. "You're still standing. You've always been the favorite, even when you didn't ask to be. The cabin? They let me list it because they knew you wouldn't raise hell. They didn't think you'd even notice." He said it so plainly, like it wasn't meant to cut. "Then they don't know me at all." That night, I didn't sleep again. But this time, I wasn't spinning in confusion. I was calculating. I pulled out every document I had from Grandpa's estate. I still had the email threads from the executor. There was no mention of Damon, no split ownership. That cabin was never meant to be sold, definitely not without my consent. I called a lawyer friend the next day just to ask questions, just to feel like I had some grip on my own life again. Turns out, selling something with a contested inheritance clause, especially if one party didn't agree, can lead to all sorts of legal headaches. Good. Later that week, I visited my parents. Not because I wanted to, because I needed to see the way they'd look at me when I asked the question they never expected. "Why didn't you ask me?" We sat in the same living room where they'd taken graduation photos, anniversary dinners, Christmas card portraits. But the air was stale now, like time had moved on, and we hadn't. My mother handed me coffee like nothing had happened. "How's work?" she asked, as if small talk could clean up this kind of mess. I set the mug down without sipping. "How long have you been using my name?" She flinched. "Not much, but enough." My father cleared his throat. "Lennox, son, it was never meant to be permanent. It was to help the family, help Damon." "You didn't even tell me." "You would have said no," my mother said quickly. "Exactly," I said, "and you did it anyway." There was a pause, long, stiff. Then she said the quiet part out loud. "You don't say no to family." I stared at her. That's not loyalty. That's control. I left before they could turn the conversation into guilt, before they could make me feel like I was the selfish one. That had always been their trick, twisting things until I questioned my own anger. But this time I didn't. I was angry, and I was right to be. I started looking into financial abuse cases that night. Quietly. I wasn't the only one, far from it. Parents co-signing loans, forging documents, leaving children with ruined credit. It was more common than I ever knew, and almost never talked about. I wasn't out for revenge, not yet, but I wasn't going to let it slide. Funny how "you're the responsible one" sounds like a compliment, until you realize it's just another word for disposable. I stopped answering their calls. No drama, no confrontations, just silence. It started with a simple decision, one that didn't require an announcement or explanation. I turned my phone face down whenever my mother's number flashed across the screen. I deleted unread voicemails without listening. The longer I stayed quiet, the more I could hear myself think again. There's a certain kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to explain yourself to people who never really listened in the first place. The funny thing, it didn't take long before the silence started bothering them. Damon texted first. Damon, Mom says you're acting weird. You ghosting us now? Damon, you got what you wanted. What else is there? Damon, don't make this ugly, man. I didn't respond, not because I was trying to be petty, but because I had nothing left to explain. The air around me began to change. I was still working, still showing up, still paying my bills. But emotionally, I was folding back into myself. That Saturday, I skipped the usual family dinner. It had become a kind of ritual over the years, one I never truly enjoyed, but always attended out of habit. I'd sit through passive-aggressive comments from my mother, side-eye glances from Damon, and my father's half-hearted attempts to keep the peace. This time I stayed home, cooked something small for myself, read a book, played some old records. At 7:42 p.m., I got a message from my mother. Mom, we noticed your seat was empty. You okay? Mom, family isn't perfect, Lennox, but we're still family. Still family, as if that alone was supposed to mean something. 3 weeks went by like that. Quiet. I didn't expect anything to shift, but one afternoon, I got a knock at the door. Not a text, not a call, a knock. When I opened it, my father was standing there. He held a small brown envelope in one hand and a plastic grocery bag in the other, containing what looked like a pie. Apple, homemade, the one I used to like. Thought I'd stop by, he said. Your mom's been worried. I stepped aside without saying anything. Not out of kindness, just courtesy. He sat on the edge of the couch like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. She didn't send me, he said. I came on my own. I nodded once and waited. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. I know what we did was not right, he finally said, voice low. But we thought we were doing what was best for everyone. No, I said. You did what was easiest for you. That's not the same thing. He looked down at his hands. When your brother couldn't get more aid and we were up against tuition deadlines, we panicked. It felt like the only way. You mean forging my identity? Selling property behind my back? Destroying my credit? I told your mother it was too far. But you didn't stop her. Silence. You were always the one we didn't worry about, he murmured. I know, I said flatly. That's the problem. He left the pie on the counter, said he hoped I'd come around. I didn't touch it. Something happens when the roles in a family start to flip, when the quiet son becomes the one who sets boundaries, when the man who once kept the peace decides he's done playing referee in a rigged game. My family didn't know how to handle it. They poked at the silence like it was a threat, like if they ignored the damage long enough, it would repair itself. But it didn't. Weeks later, I ran into Damon at a friend's birthday gathering. Neither of us expected to see the other. He had a drink in one hand and the same smug smirk on his face. Still on your noble crusade? He asked as I passed him near the bar. I'm just living my life, I said. You should try it sometime. He leaned in closer, lowered his voice. You think cutting us off makes you a hero? All you're doing is proving you never cared about this family. I turned to him, eyes steady. I cared, that's why it hurts. But I've stopped confusing loyalty with self-destruction. He blinked, like he didn't expect me to sound so calm. You're making Mom sick with all this. Number she did that, I said. Not me. I walked away before he could spin it any further. Sometimes clarity doesn't come in loud cinematic scenes. Sometimes it's just standing your ground without raising your voice. Around that time, I found something in a box I hadn't opened in years. My grandfather's key. It was taped to a faded index card that read, in his handwriting, "You earned this, not because you asked, but because you didn't." I held it in my palm for a long time, the weight of it more emotional than physical. I remembered the smell of pine from the cabin, the crackling fire, his voice telling me stories that didn't need to be dramatic to matter. That key wasn't just to a building, it was a symbol of trust. Something my parents never gave me, but he did. Some inherit money, some inherit legacy. Me, I inherited silence and a key to something they couldn't take. It didn't happen overnight. This kind of reclamation of dignity, of space, of name, moves like winter thaw, slow, deliberate, and absolutely certain. The morning I made the call, I didn't feel brave. I felt tired, but that kind of tired that tells you something's about to change. I reached out to a nonprofit that specializes in identity theft and financial abuse within families. Their intake coordinator, Leah, had a voice like warm flannel and no trace of judgment. She listened, really listened. When I told her about the loans, the forged signatures, the sold cabin, the silence I'd wrapped myself in for months, she just said, I want you to know you're not crazy and you're not alone. Not once did she ask, but they're your parents, right? She connected me to a legal advisor, a woman named Delaney Price, who had worked on over 24 cases like mine. Different faces, different families, but the same betrayal wrapped in, we did it for you. Delaney was calm, sharp. She didn't sugarcoat anything. Cases like yours are messy, she said during our first video call, because they're built on the assumption that love cancels out accountability. I stared at the screen for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, that sounds about right. She leaned forward slightly. But love doesn't erase paper trails. And what they did? That's financial fraud, Lennox, no matter how well-intentioned they say it was. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork. It was reading my own name in black and white legal language. As a victim. I'd never used that word for myself before. There's something deeply American about believing you can bootstrap your way out of anything. Debt, trauma, even betrayal. But this wasn't about bootstraps anymore. This was about boundaries. And I was finally drawing the damn line. The civil complaint was filed quietly. No press, no courtroom showdown, just documents, certified mail, a case number, a copy sent to my parents' home. I didn't warn them. Why would I? They hadn't warned me. 3 weeks passed before I heard anything. And then came the call. From my mother. I can't believe you're doing this, she snapped. To your own family. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sigh or soften. I just asked one question. Did you ever believe I'd find out? There was silence on the other end. You're making this public, she said finally, voice trembling with something between panic and rage. You're trying to humiliate us. No, I said. I'm trying to reclaim myself. Later that night, Damon left a voicemail. I didn't answer. You're going too far, man. You're acting like we ruined your life. It wasn't like that. Then quieter. You know this could bankrupt them, right? I deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but because I'd heard enough justifications to last a lifetime. The hearing date was set for a Monday morning. I wore a navy suit, no tie. I wanted to look honest, not performative. I brought a binder with every record I had, the fake loan applications, the property transfer, emails, even a copy of the handwritten note from my grandfather. They didn't show up. Delaney told me it wasn't uncommon. People who manipulate from behind the curtain rarely step onto a public stage. Still, the absence stung in a way I didn't expect. Not because I needed a showdown, but because part of me, despite everything, still thought maybe they'd want to explain themselves. To me, not just the court. The judge read through the file, took her time, and then she looked at me. "I want to acknowledge what's not written here," she said. "This isn't just about money, it's about breach of trust. That may not be punishable in a legal sense, but in a personal sense, it's the deepest cut." I felt something tighten behind my eyes, but I didn't break. I just nodded. She ruled in my favor. The loans would be declared fraudulently obtained, the credit damage removed, the cabin now subject to a separate investigation. It wasn't just a win, it was validation. When I stepped out into the sunlight that day, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty, but a good kind of empty, like a room finally cleared out after years of clutter. I walked 2 blocks before I allowed myself to breathe deeply, and then I laughed, quietly but real. Not because it was funny, but because I'd survived something no one saw coming, not even me. That evening I stood at my balcony window, key in my pocket. The cabin hadn't been sold yet, not completely. The sale was being contested because of the forgery, which meant for now it was still mine. I looked out across the city skyline, lights blinking like some kind of silent applause, and I wondered, not angrily, but curiously, what else I'd been taught to silently carry. Sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. Sometimes it's just your name, finally fully yours again. The fallout came quietly, just like the betrayal had. No screaming, no confrontation, just unraveling. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Damon had lost his job. Apparently, HR ran a background check on some newly surfaced credit discrepancies linked to his name. Whether it was because of the court filings or just bad timing, I'll never know. But the timing, it was poetic. He didn't call, didn't send a message. For once, the silence wasn't mine. My mother, however, found new fuel. She sent out one of her infamous chain emails to the extended family. Subject line in all caps, "Our son is destroying us." I know because my aunt forwarded it to me. She wrote just 4 words under the forwarded message: "I'm sorry. I see you." That meant more than she knew. Sometimes being believed is the beginning of healing. I didn't respond to the drama, didn't post a rebuttal online, didn't clarify my side in any family group chats. Let them talk. Let them spin. Truth doesn't beg to be defended. 3 weeks later, I drove upstate to the cabin. The legal mess had slowed down the sale. With the fraud case settled, the cabin reverted back into my name until probate court decided if the deed would hold. It was mine, for now, and that was enough. The road was still bumpy, pine needles scattered like memory threads along the gravel. I pulled into the old clearing and just sat there for a while, letting the stillness soak into my bones. The air smelled like damp wood and something older, something sacred. Inside, it hadn't changed much. A thin layer of dust, some fallen branches against the porch rail. The kind of wear that doesn't scream neglect. It just waits for someone to come back. I turned the key. It still fit. The first breath I took inside was sharp and cold. I walked through slowly, running my hand along the kitchen counter, pausing at the old photograph above the fireplace. Grandpa and me splitting logs, both of us squinting in the sun. It was the only photo I hadn't taken down after he passed, because somehow it felt like he was still standing right beside me in it. I didn't plan to stay long, but I ended up staying the night. I cleaned the floor, patched the leaky faucet, and opened the back window that always stuck halfway. It moved easier now, as if even the house had been waiting for a second chance. That evening I built a fire, not out of necessity, but ritual. I found a folded flannel shirt in the hall closet, still smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar. I put it on, sat down, and just listened to the crackling wood, to the wind shifting through tall trees, to the part of myself that didn't need to prove anything anymore. The next morning, a knock. I blinked, confused at first. No one ever came up here. I opened the door and there she was, Holland. We hadn't spoken in years, but she lived nearby. Grandpa's former neighbor. She used to bring over peach pies in the summer, always left them without ringing the bell. She smiled softly, holding a small brown bag. I saw smoke from the chimney, figured it was either you or a bear who learned how to start a fire. I laughed genuinely. Definitely the lesser of two threats. She handed me the bag. Fresh scones. Warm. Still smelled like cinnamon. We sat on the steps, coffee in hand, the air sharp and alive. "You're different," she said after a while. Not as a question, more like an observation. "Yeah," I replied. "I think I finally stopped trying to make everything make sense." She nodded. "Good. Let them sit with the silence for a while. It's where the truth echoes loudest." After she left, I walked to the edge of the clearing, the old tree where Grandpa and I used to tie up fishing lines and talk about things neither of us ever said in front of others. I dug a small hole near the roots, pulled out the cabin sale flyer I'd taken from the city, folded it once, then twice, set it down, covered it. Done. That afternoon, I sanded the living room floor. One panel had cracked years ago, and we'd always talked about fixing it, but never did. So I did it now, not because I had to, but because it mattered. That's the thing they never understood. Some things you reclaim not with grand gestures or court rulings. You reclaim them with care, with hands, with time. When I finally left the cabin that evening, I locked the door slowly. The key felt heavier than when I'd arrived, but in a good way, like it had meaning again. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel hollow. I didn't feel angry. I felt returned to myself. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop asking broken people to protect what's sacred to you. Some things you learn to guard on your own. The letter came on a Tuesday. No big stamp, no drama, just a government envelope, creased at the edge. Inside, confirmation that all fraudulent student debt tied to my name had been formally discharged. The record cleared. My credit restored. It felt anticlimactic, but sometimes closure doesn't explode. It exhales. I held the paper for a while, then folded it neatly and slid it into a drawer. Not as a trophy, but as a record. Proof not that I fought, but that I walked through it all and stayed standing. I didn't tell anyone. Not my coworkers, not my neighbors. Certainly not my family. By now we hadn't spoken in over 3 months. Even the guilt texts had stopped. The silence no longer felt like tension. It felt like air I could finally breathe. One Friday morning, as fall crept in and the city turned gold at the edges, I attended a small community event about financial literacy and recovery. Leah, the first person I'd spoken to at the nonprofit, had invited me. She asked if I'd be willing to speak, not as a victim, but as a story. Not to warn people, but to remind them, you're not crazy for expecting respect. I stood in front of 30-something strangers in a drafty library room and said something I didn't realize I believed until it left my mouth. What hurt wasn't just the debt. It was learning that the people who raised me thought I was easiest to steal from because I wouldn't fight back. They were right until I wasn't. The room was still. A few people nodded. One woman wiped her cheek quietly. That was enough. I didn't need applause. I didn't want to be inspiring. I just wanted to be heard. A week later, I got a text from an unknown number. "We heard what you said, that you don't forgive us. We didn't expect it to come to this. We only wanted what was best for the family." I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. Not because I was angry, because I didn't need that conversation anymore. Forgiveness had nothing to do with them now. I didn't owe anyone softness. I owed myself honesty. By mid-November, I'd filed to permanently transfer ownership of the cabin into my name, backed by the court decision. There were no appeals. No one showed up to contest it. I guess they'd finally decided the silence was real. On Thanksgiving, while most people were carving turkey and pretending everything was fine, I drove back up to the cabin. No big plans. Just a backpack, a flannel, and a new doormat that read, "Not everything inherited is worth keeping." That evening, I cooked a simple dinner. Nothing fancy, just enough for one. I lit a fire, sat in the same chair Grandpa always used, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to collapse. No emails buzzing, no warnings in my gut. Just peace. Somewhere in the quiet, I realized I hadn't thought about revenge in weeks. Not even once. Because it was never about getting even. It was about getting clear. The next morning, as the sun cut through the trees, I stepped outside with a mug of coffee and watched the fog roll low through the clearing. And I said out loud, to no one, and maybe to everyone, "You don't get to decide who I become." I do that day. I wrote one final thing in my grandfather's old journal. Something I hadn't touched in years. Legacy isn't about who you come from. It's about who you choose not to become. Sometimes the hardest part of healing isn't fighting back. It's choosing to walk forward without bitterness. If there's one thing I've learned from this, it's that silence can be power. Not every battle needs noise. Some just need clarity, boundaries, and the courage to stop carrying what was never yours. What would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever been seen as the strong one until it was used against you? If this story struck a chord, let me know where you're watching from or what part hit home for you. And if it didn't, tell me why. I'd love to hear your perspective. If you felt something watching this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Your story might be more powerful than you think.